All right, we are live. And I'm gonna get the link so we can share it on our pages. Yeah.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Day 15, Black August Power Hour. A pleasure to be here with you guys again, commemorating and remembering 50 years of freedom fighting that stemmed from the prison movement following the assassination of George Jackson in 1970 and 71. And so in the spirit of revolution, we're back at you, continuing to build our minds, our body, and our spirit for revolution. So I want to, first and foremost, I just want to extend get well soon to our comrade Akimba, who's not feeling well today and resting his body. So we all just want to continue to take care of ourselves, our body, mind, and our spirit. And so just want to make sure I start out giving a shout out to him. And next, I want to turn the mic over to our other co-host, Yane. You want to introduce yourself?
I am Yane. I use she, her, us, we pronouns. I am in the so-called Philadelphia part of Lenape-Hopkins territory. Just happy to be here and proud also that we envisioned this and that we were able to do this work for this time every day, and the discipline and growth and strength that came through that. And I'm also really just excited about the things that I've learned and thinking about how to apply the things that I've learned from this process and with all of you and together.
All right, thank you, Yane. All right, we got two special guests. Or I'm sorry, we got one special guest who's going to be facilitating today, who's been here rocking with us pretty much every day during this Black August Power Hour. Brother Al Green, you want to introduce yourself, Al?
You were already unmuted, you just muted yourself. You're still mute.
Yeah, everybody. I'm Al from Philadelphia. Mahi. And that's it. I don't know.
All right,
So,
Al, thanks. Go
no
ahead, Al.
today, we just going right into the reading?
No, we're gonna.
Oh, no, we're just doing
great.
intros right now.
Oh, okay,
So yeah,
okay.
just wanted to make sure to let everybody know today you're going to be facilitating the reading. And
right.
As everybody knows, been watching, you know, there's no executive leadership or any of that kind of thing. We all embrace each other as leaders. And therefore, that's one of the primary reasons why we continue to switch positions. Another reminder I want to mention, I've been learning a lot about movement over time. And I just want to continue to acknowledge the power, the contribution, the leadership of the women, the sisters, non-gender conforming folks in movement, as well as this movement. And so I think historically, those narratives have been kind of either whitewashed, patriarchal washed, forgotten when it comes to the contribution of our sisters, women, non-conforming gendered folk. So I just want to, again, make sure we're looking at the numbers, you know, when it comes to who's ushering this space and the contribution, and that has been tailored, facilitated by the sisters, the women, as well as non-gender conforming people. All right, so with no further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Yane, who's going to lead us today with our exercise and stretching. On the move.
On the move. So we are going to get started. I'm going to start off with Master Teacher Erykah Badu that was recommended previously by And we're going to start off with some stretches. So I will make sure you off the scene. I'm trying to think of the location I can put this where the lighting is going to be. Cool. All right. So let's start off with 2 minutes stretching, and then we're going to go right into jumping jacks from there. All right. So we start off. Double head, go, head down, go to the right, go to the back, to the left, back down, then go the other way, back, right, and down, and back up, and then that again. Put our head down, right, your ear to your shoulder, and then to the back, to the left, left ear to the shoulder, down, up, back the other way, head down, left, back, right, down. And now we're going to go up to our shoulders. Right shoulder to the roll. Back. Front, leg. A little bigger with our arms. And shoulder to the back. Big circle. The other way. Right. Now we're going to roll our feet. We're going to lean forward and roll around to the right. Back. And go to the side again. And front. And to the second line. Same direction. We're going to stop in the middle of the square and come up. Take out a little bit, and we're going to go the other way. So back now, lean forward, and go the opposite direction to the side, to the back, and to the right, forward again, then to the side, to the back, to your other side, back forward, come up, and just take your hips a little to the left and right again. Now we're going to stretch a little bit of our legs. So we're just going to put our feet shoulder length apart, and we're going to just do a hang. We're going to just do a hang stretch. And we'll still do the hang stretch. We're just going to hang down. Hang for 2 seconds. Every time you inhale, like hold your position, and then exhale and just go a little bit deeper. And then inhale, hold your position. Exhale, just go a little deeper. Shake around a little bit, keep yourself loose. And then slowly come up. So just start coming up a little from the waist. Keep your arms hanging, let your head hang. You're going to bring your head up flat. And just slowly straighten up. Slowly straightening up. Your shoulders hanging until you get up high. And then bring your shoulders down. And then bring your head up straight and shake that out. And now we're going to go right into jumping jacks. Remember to breathe. 30 more seconds.
Baby sleeping, time to put her down, and I'll be hanging round until the sundown. Hey.
10 seconds. All right. So we're gonna go straight into our run. So let's just start running in place. Let's do that for a minute. I got the timer going for our mutual activity, so that's why there's no stop timer. Y'all trust me. Got 20 seconds left.
Trust me, it's only a test.
At home, printed one, full mix.
All right. There we go. And let's go to some new song. Let's go, let's check out a little more of that. Nice. Yeah, let's do Nobody featuring Lauryn Hill. Where did it go?
Step 1, fire up the bed
Of course,
MGM.
they always want to give us.
Step 2, go with your gut.
Don't forget to breathe. Reset the timer. And I'm going to share it so everybody can see it now. So y'all know what we're doing.
One city, one country, one state.
Take a moment to catch your breath.
Someplace to be.
I'm doing that too.
Someplace to be.
All right.
Someplace you wouldn't know problem.
So we're going to do, I like the kicks that we've been doing. So we're going to do some kicks. So we're going to do a minute kick. So when we start at the one, keep the balance, kick out. Let's go.
Out here in the trap. Houses in Long Island, they always found him. House in the South, a nigga barely got out. Sunny LA, remember calls with Dr. Dre. He told me, don't let the palm trees fool you, nigga, be safe.
We did that
Me and
stretch
my higher
so
self, we often would speak. Somehow we lost the
get some nice
connection. Like me
kicks in
and Joshua
now.
Tree. And it's been bothering me. Too many wavy women, gotta log out the IG. Can't be my age DMing. No kidding. It's hard to move like a civilian. I write the truth cause I live it. Not like you musical niggas. We did it big and they biggest. They rather shoot than write tickets. What it feel like to go get it. What it feel like to go miss it. In one city, one country, one state. Someplace to be nobody. Someplace to be. Someplace you wouldn't know problem. Someplace to be nobody. My dog bought a plane, said let's go to Paris. That's where baguettes are from. French bread that's long and narrow.
All right.
I like the other definition,
We're going to
rectangular
reset
carrots.
and go right into, we're going to get on the floor
This
and go
girl
right
said in
into some
Grenada we should go
push-ups.
get married.
We haven't done any push-ups in a couple of days, I think.
And you got your own
So let's do some
Favorite
today.
part of the night when you text me that you made it home safe.
And you can do them in
I'm
sets,
contemplating at the
which
home
is how I've
base, how I used
typically
to
done
breakfast
them,
in the ghetto,
or you
sipping
can
no
do
tea.
them
That's a picture
all at
right
once.
there, a moment
Just
in
go
time.
straight,
Before
pace
anybody
yourself,
wanted a
push-ups
photo
at
of
work.
mine. Before
You
the
can
internet
do
and
full
the social
push-ups,
decline destroyed the
where you
vibe, fooling us with the
are
headlines.
out like so. You can do half push-ups on your knees, or you can plank. So you can do a full
One city,
plank,
one country, one
or you
state.
can do a half plank on your elbows, or
Place to be
a half plank up on your arms but on your knees. And then the final option
Someplace to be.
is to actually
Someplace you wouldn't know
walk
problem.
stand
Someplace to be
distance from the
nobody.
wall and push up like this. Okay, so whichever works for you.
All my time I spent
We're gonna get started on the 1 minute
Why would I
mark.
join them when I know that I could beat them now? They put their words on me and they can eat them now. It's probably why they keep on telling me I'm needed now. They tried to box me out while taking what they want from me. I spent too many years living too uncomfortably, making room for people who didn't like the labor but wanted to spoil greedy, selfish behavior. Now let me give it to you balanced and with clarity. I don't need to turn myself into a parody. I don't do the shit you do for popularity. They clearly didn't understand when I said I get out apparently. My awareness like Keanu in the Matrix. I'm saving souls and y'all complaining about my lateness. Now it's illegal for someone to walk in greatness. They want the same, but they don't take risks. Now the world will get to see its own reflection. And the anointed can pursue their own direction. And if you're wrong and you're too proud to hear correction, walk into the hole you dug yourself up a projection. See me in my freedom taking all my land back. They said a lot against me thinking I just stand back. I got my legs beneath me, I got my hands back. A lot of people sabotaged, they couldn't stand that. I turned the other cheek, I took blow after blow. There's so much crisis in the world because you reap what you sow. When you keep what you know is meant for someone else.
All right, we're gonna stop it there. It's 12:18. I'm gonna turn it back over to Raphael. We're gonna get that 2 minutes on the timer though, so we can
All right.
get our win, get our rest, get some.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Hey, we feeling the bird. That's what happens on the Black Caucus Power Hour. So, yeah, everybody, let's take 2 minutes, get some water, catch your breath, and then we'll get started with the reading by Al Green.
Discover a new world at Twin Spires Casino, where you take control of your destiny. Hundreds of games with huge payouts. Twin Spires offers new players 24 hours of risk-free betting, up to $500, plus 250 free spins. Discover a new world at Twin Spires Casino.
Feel that. 2 weeks to 95. All the way live. Then we out. Yeah. On peut vous juger par vos paroles. Alors faites attention à vos paroles, mon frère. Pas de temps à jouer, car 1995 est ici, et c'est notre année. Alors nous avançons avec la foi de Dieu. I live. Jagai. Every day of my life, I bear witness to the power of words and what they do to the many and the few. I'm speaking thoughts with the mind and the mouth open, keeping my people on point. Plus, I'm hoping that my words sound power will devour the fools, for they know not the hour. The Most High rules. I got an aura created by words of praise. Original G, watch high as I amaze on my pupils. When I speak, I have scoop, speak my mind. On the tabernacle, in the tap, distill my thoughts to all the words I say, all the lessons I brought into the cipher.
All right, everybody. Welcome back. Hope everybody's feeling good, feeling the burn. All right. One thing too, I wanted to make a quick disclaimer about when it comes to the music. I know folks have been hearing a lot of different revolutionary kind of tunes and sounds, whether it's hip hop, R&B, et cetera, reggae. But I think it's our focus as well when we think about music. You know, what are we putting in our minds and our bodies and hearts from that vibration? And we're still trying to keep that consistent as well with the revolutionary vibe. All right. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Al.
Yeah, what page did we finish on last?
I believe
it was 152.
152. All right, hold on.
Right at the bottom of the the paragraph, the first full paragraph is where we are.
All right.
The shock troops.
I'm getting there. Give me 1 second. Okay. The shock troops of fascism on the mass political level are drawn from members of the lower middle class who feel the upward thrust of the lower classes more acutely. These classes feel that any dislocation of the present economy resulting from the upward thrust of the masses would affect their status first. They are joined by that sector of working class which is backward enough to be affected by nationalistic trappings and the loyalty syndrome that sociologists have termed authoritarian personality. One primary aim of the fascist arrangement is to extend and develop this new pig class, to degenerate and diffuse working class consciousness with a psychosocial appeal to man's herd instincts. Development and exploitation of the authoritarian syndrome is at the center of totalitarian capitalism, fascism. It feeds on a small but still false sense of class consciousness and need for community. The collective spirit in fascism is a morbid phenomenon that grows out of the psychopathology of mob behavior. With each development in the fascist arrangement, the marriage between the political elite and economic elite becomes more apparent. The integration of various sectors of the total economic elite becomes more pronounced. The Romanian Iron Guard was no exception. It would have eventually bedded down with the owners and financiers and integrated their archaic sectors of the traditionalist capitalist elites with a modern sector had it not encountered the Red Army. The generals and colonels of the various Latin American fascist regimes are attempting contrapositive mobilization and functioning as an instrument to balance the interests of traditionalists with more modern sectors of the neo-colonial nations. It is very misleading to regard them as the ruling class of such nations or to consider them as part of a populistic movement. As in Romania and Spain, state intervention simply serves the best interests of a diminishing capitalist ruling class by restructuring it and destroying the people's labor movement. Capitalist political regimes cannot exist on their own. Without the support of the government, capitalism simply could not prevail. Perón was a fascist. The peace he worked out between labor and owner was subtle and disguised, but nonetheless fascist in that it appeased and diffused the workers' resentment of the non-worker and effected a quite efficient counter-positive mobilization. Perón maintained an apparent popular appeal throughout his years as head of state because of the vanguard party's willingness to settle for reformism and tokens and a less than junior partner relationship with capital. His arrangement of the fascist state was indeed singular. Like the USA, the original structure of the society in which he had to work his scientific manipulations had only one available sector large enough and uprooted enough without strong left direction to carry his movement, labor. Perón the fascist found his strongest support in labor. He was finally disposed when he lost the favor of the economic elite. At heart, all fascist manipulators are elitists and revere private ownership. They are backwards and reactionary to the ultimate extreme of self-destruction. Perón might have held on to his position had he chosen to serve the laboring class honestly and make it a genuine power base for the society, one which truly embraced their interests by nationalizing the productive facilities and turning them over to labor's management. But fascists would rather die or flee than support total revolution. So they must be slain. The very first step in establishing the whole interest of the state, the combine, the corporate state, is to dismantle the working class movement and replace it either with a state-controlled organ or no organization at all. The corporate laws passed in Italy in the 1934 served only to sanction the complete destruction of the totalitarian movement. At the same time, they set up an automatic defense mechanism against future labor activity. In disputes, labor was represented by men sworn either to the state or without the skill and intelligence to affect labor's demands. The manufacturing class had long since literally married into the regime. In Italy, the fascist party cadre spread throughout the nation, organizing people left aimless by the failure of the positive mobilization of the socialist vanguard parties. People who had dropped out, defected, people who became uprooted and undeployed either by war or by the deflated economy. This organizing must be considered contra-positive mobilization, and that its intent was to inflate the capitalist economy and deflate the workers and people's influence and control over the economy. With easy credit, inflationary financing, and increased government sponsorship of public works projects, fascism in Italy, Germany, and Japan succeeded in reconstructing capitalist productive institutions and traditional property relations. After the takeover, Italy recovered rapidly from the 1920 to 25 post-war depression. The ordinary complexities created by inflationary budgeting did not immediately manifest themselves because of the pre-existing state of the economy. The untapped productive factors, capital and labor, were grinding to a standstill. Cost of living and cost of production under those circumstances did not immediately rise to the point of crisis, diminishing returns for capital, decrease in real wages of labor. Later, in both Italy from 1925 to 26 and Germany from 1937 to 38, this inflationary budgeting showed the damaging trends and set off a chain reaction in Germany that may have eventually led to its downfall. However, the heart of the fascist economy is an attempt at control through centralization, monopoly capital control, price fixing, wage freezes, and carefully balanced foreign trade. The first currency crisis stimulated by Italy's inflationary policies, initiated in 1925, resulted in the stabilizing of the lira by decree in 1927. A controlled deflationary period followed, effected through the banking systems which the regime influenced by decree or advice. Private interests protected themselves from totally destructive competition by using the regime as referee. After the Great Depression and the international rise of fascism states by default, refinements in its simple currency control methods were introduced. The replacement of competition with cooperation among the private interests became more standardized. The Germans realized that inflationary currency control will have little real effect on the expansion of heavy industry without also controlling the capital market. Direction of investment was also a key factor in the arrangement. Again, the regime functioned as the centralizing, mitigating influence. Real wages began to fall and industrial production rose. Considered against the gross natural product, investment rose 25% by 1937 in Germany. The same 25% figure held true for Japan in the middle and late 30s. From 15% gross natural product at the lowest point of the Great Depression in fascist Italy, annual average investment in industry rose to 19 or 20% in the years of 1936 through 1940. Because Italian fascism was already established when the entire Western capital markets banking system failed, there was a sizable amount of quasi-government ownership. The Industrial Reconstructive Institute, established by the regime, was quite simply a financial institution, a huge bank. It also indirectly owned or influenced large sectors of the nation's heavy industry, a further hint at an upward thrust of the middle classes to fill in sections of the traditional ruling class destroyed by the forces of the business cycle. In general, the developments and experiments in controlled capitalism resulted in a concentration of economic power in the large monopolies. The crisis in German foreign exchange murdered the small businessmen. Small agricultural units tended to disappear because of low wages, low consumption, and large increases in the arts of agricultural production. The necessity for government intervention increased as the interests of the private elites generated new tensions. The breakdown of the big industrial pattern into sections the regulation or elimination of real competition, except, of course, for labor when it was short, and the control of labor organizations basically comprised the whole of the new fascist economic arrangement, which attempted to reduce the vast strata of classes and class interests of the pre-existing state of the economy to just the two principal classes, the haves and the have-nots. The psychosocial dimensions of fascism become quite complex, but they can be simplified by thinking of them as part of a collective bargaining process carried on between all the elites of a particular state, with the regime acting as arbitrator. The regime's interests are subject to those of the ruling class. Labor is a partner in this arrangement. At the head of any labor organization in the fascist state, there is an elite which is tied to the interests of the regime, and consequently tied also to the economic status quo. The trappings of this pseudo-mass society are empty, cheap, spectacular leisure sports. Parades where strangers meet, shout each other down, and often trample each other to death on the way home. Mass consumption of worthless super suds or aspirin, ritualistic, ultra-naturalistic events on days to glorify the idiots who died at war, or other days to defy those who sent them out to die. A mass society that is actually a mass jungle. At its core, fascism is capitalistic and capitalism is international. Beneath its national ideological trappings, fascism is always ultimately an international movement. Many of the fascist regimes that failed or lacked thrust, the Belgian Rexus, the Dutch NSB, Japan's arrangement, Romania's Iron Guard, were all essentially too imitative and inflexible. Even totalitarians must be supple and responsive if they are to survive. Peronism was imitative, as was the Brazilian Integratistas. They were emulating their colonial masters in the USA. So one fascist regime falls to another, more efficient fascist regime. Two factors must be seriously considered when analyzing the two largest fascist states in Latin America, Brazil and Argentina. Their dependence on foreign trade and their neo-colonial status, which involves dependence on foreign investment. When exports fall as they did during the Depression of the 30s, the value of the national currency must also fall, and it follows that imports automatically decrease. The battle to balance payment begins, necessitating massive governmental intervention, which leads to inexorably inflationary domestic economic policy, and sometimes to a conflict of interest with the ruling class of the parent nation. Concern for balance of payment determines international economic motives. The deficit financing, the attempt to control incomes by controlling labor, price fixing, government stockpiling of agricultural surpluses, positive direction of investment, and the balancing of the interests of the dualistic economy's elite can all be pointed to as evidence of an attempt to employ the centralist control that characterized the classic fascist arrangement. The first fascist regime of Brazil was headed by Vargas. It lasted from 1930 to 1945. Coffee exports formed 70% of the nation's GNP prior to Vargas' takeover of the Depression. When international trade, especially in educational goods, collapsed, Vargas was forced to attempt experiments with the so-called closed economy. New internal markets had to be created, investment and motors relocated, industrialization attempted. But all of this planning, though successful to an extent, was still basically imitative and did not accurately reflect the realities of the nation's inability to accumulate capital. It is extremely important not to confuse these three phases of fascism when studying Latin America. The second phase, in power but not secure, is the really significant part of the whole fascist episode. Regime after regime has failed to increase internal demand or unseat the traditionalist landed elite in favor of the small industrial interests. This means a permanent dependence on foreign trade and investment for machine tools, for weapons to control the people's movements, and for raw materials to feed their light industries and flea markets. Consequently, we see these areas as the most glaring dichotomy of socioeconomic injustice. In the shadow of their plush beach resorts, which attract degenerates from all over the Western world, literally within rifle shots, live the people who service these vacation resorts complexes and disease-infested corrugated tin shanties on hillsides constantly ravaged by mudslides. A strange combination of the first two phases of fascism. Without the massive military aids of the United States, Gestapo death squads, and the most intensive rightist terror, the guns of liberation would now have certainly filled the streets and forests with blood to the horse's brow. It is important never to lose sight of Latin America's neo-colonial status. A victory for the People's Liberation Armies entails a victory over international capitalism, especially a victory over their colonial masters. The puppet regimes of these areas cannot move firmly into phase 3 of the fascist reign for two reasons. The people are willing to use arms and are learning to use them more effectively, and because the regimes are imitative and not indigenous, they do not reflect the real interests of the nation's elite, but rather the interests of the ruling elites of the parent imperial nation, the USA. Germany attempted to rearm, deflate its currency, and at the same time continue to meet the war-swollen demands of heavy industry. It finally fell on its own weight. The fascist economy arrangement failed under the pressure of war in Germany, in Austria, in Italy, and Japan, as later it failed the first regimes of Brazil and Argentina. The principal failing was very much the same that brought down laissez-faire. The capitalist business cycle cannot be controlled. Inflationary, spasmodic attacks, regional recession and depression pursue capitalism in all its forms like a nemesis, breaks its spirits, reduce its top-heavy bureaucratic backbone to jelly. Inflation, at first the key to regeneration after the extended collapse, ultimately leads to complex problems that seem to be beyond regulatory remedy. To control it by compressing wage demands always turns out to be politically unsound. Class consciousness in Germany was better developed than in any other European nation before and after the fascist takeover. So consciousness alone is obviously not the factor that determines which way a disintegrating society will develop, fascist or socialist. The task of diffusing the people's labor movement and balancing it in favor of the few special individual heavy industrial firms, Weizsäcker, Hermann, Göring, Krupp, and the vital interests of the increasingly important chemical industry, IG Farben, etc., fell to the regime-sponsored labor front. Its first attempt to appease labor came in the form of slightly improved working conditions, meaningless slogans like strength through joy, which echoed the Anglo-American work ethic, Even after the forcible suppression of the Vanguard Party by the Gestapo in the first years of the regime, the potential political power of labor, due to the workers' importance in the production of heavy arrangements, was such that really effective measures for controlling it were not devised throughout the tenure of the Third Reich. Wage increases couldn't be avoided. Vigorous state controls replaced mild suppression and propaganda only after the Sudetenland affair of 1938 and the accentuated armament drive of 1939. Because wages could not be successfully held down, the individual firms were after profits, bear in mind. Consequently, they devised many indirect incentives designed to attract the shrinking labor market. Measures were taken to limit the movements of laborers from place to place, and the other factors of production were openly channeled into the armament sectors by stringent government intervention. All idealistic ideological pretenses were dropped. Racism and the interests of the military-industrial complex formed the economic and psychosocial motives of the society and shook it apart. I don't know where we're supposed to stop, so somebody tell me when to stop.
I think that's perfect right there.
That was perfect, Al. Yeah. Thanks for that powerful read, Al. I think you raised a lot of important points that folks are probably eager to jump into. I just want to remind folks, I put in the chat today, just based on some other things personally we have going on, Kimber being out, we'll be sure to wrap up our talk today at 1 p.m. So just a FYI before we get started with the discourse. So Al, I don't know if you want to take a stab at it or someone else. I know, you were the reader. So anybody could jump in here.
I don't have an opinion on it. Like I say, man, as we read the book, I just how deep he was, I'm just still blown away, that he studied all of these revolutions all around and actually compare them and pulled out the necessary stuff that you would need for one here. So, I don't know a whole lot about fascism, so I'm learning about fascism through reading this actually. Because the first time I read the book, I was reading about just about the revolution. So all the other revolutions and the different regimes, I didn't really know too much about. So, he's really just breaking it down to the lowest compound and separating the fascists. And, I'm just blown away. I don't really have an opinion. It's just so much information coming in. And I appreciate the work that he put in on thinking this stuff. That's it.
I think that was a big thing that stuck with me today, Al, where oftentimes I continue to reiterate how this is a blueprint for revolution. But I think today's reading, and we can kind of apply it as we see, as you're describing historically, this is a blueprint for fascism, and a blueprint for what is fascism, how does it look like, and what are the continued changes and morphing that it continues to take over time. Yane, I saw your hand.
Yeah, there were a couple of things that came to my mind. One, I was just I'm seeking to better be able to have a solid picture of those three phases: out of power, in power but not secure, I think it was, and in power and insecure. Trying to get a better sense of each of those. And so I don't know if other people have an understanding of that more solidly than I do, but I feel like I'm kind of getting it, and I'm getting it more as we read further. But that's one of the things that I'm trying to get but more locked in on and understanding of these definitions that he's offering. But one of the other things, so I'm asking about that in case anybody has any information. And then at the same time, I say a couple of things I thought about when he was talking about Perón and how he manipulated working class to believe that he was working in their interest, but was really working from with a fascist agenda, but also ultimately not fully in favor of the establishment elite. It made me think of Bernie. It made me think of Bernie Sanders and his rhetoric. Are you ready for the revolution? The way, one of the things that he talks about is how when these struggles are in place, when there's national trauma that's happening, that there's a large working class that's kind of not fully functioning, doesn't have direction. And then they are captured because the vanguard didn't do their job to be prepared to capture them. And I remember thinking about that and being frustrated when in 2016, Bernie conceded, but then captured all of these people who were ready for like more of a revolutionary mindset in their imagination, even though they didn't know what that meant, through like the Our Revolution, mechanism that was built and all of these things, where he ultimately was serving the elite, even though at the same time, he's not fully embraced by the elite, which is why his presidency consistently was being blocked. So I really was looking at those parallels and how, because one of the things I'm consistently seeking to do is to relate this information to what's happening today. So that was one thing that I saw and that I thought of during this. And I still see the consistent call to the vanguard to take responsibility for being ready. I feel like that's the consistent message all the way throughout this book, and I hear it in this section as well. What happens when when the vanguard is not ready? That these community of people who are looking for relief from their struggles and are tired of the impact of the current system are able to be manipulated into actions, activities, and mobilizations that are actually counterpositive, as he described them, counterpositive. And so, that's some of what I was getting. But I also agree with Al, like all of this history that he is able to reference and speak to. It's a lot to take in and to parse through it when you don't know it. And while I still appreciate it, there's like a certain amount of study I think that one has to do in order to fully grasp what's being offered through this book.
Indeed, Yane. For folks who wasn't here, I think it was yesterday, and just want to be clear about where George started to speak about those 3 forms of fascism. That's on page 143. And I think in today's reading by Al, he applied one of those 3 forms, or even multiple, but kind of went into some different examples of each. All right. Other thoughts, questions? Folks, we got about 9 minutes before we have to wrap up. Medusa, Emily, Indy, you guys have any thoughts or anything that stood out or responses to Al or Yane's comments?
I wanted to say too, I noticed how he broke the fascism down in 3 phases, and he kind of did the same thing when he did the white people in America, as far as like he used the three examples then, like the ones that would be hell bent against revolution, people that would be kind of indifferent, and then the people that you might could use in the revolution. So I just the way his mind works, where you take that class of people and identify, even though they're the enemy, who can I use, who can I use for our purposes? Who can I break down? I mean, that's just good work. You know what I mean?
I'll add this point too, and it kind of connects to something Yane said. Vibing with Brother Jalil and the Black Organizing Committee in Rochester, he mentioned the importance of the vanguard beginning to politically educate the people. And when I think about what happened in 2016, as Yane described it, Bernie sort of creating this movement towards, I would say, a sort of revolutionary conscience. I don't know if it is intended in a degree where George is describing, but as soon as that concession happened, and I think, again, positioning him within this sort of fascist framework, him stepping back saying, I'm now going to kind of go wherever direction, Republicans are going because I'm a part of this. I can see how from that moment, that's where that political education happens. I can see it from the sense of breaking down these elements. Okay, what is fascism and where are we right now with this concession of this entire movement? I think the same thing could be applied in 2020. You know, when there was a movement immediately after George Floyd's murder, the same question after reactionary politics began to shun, pacify, quiet the movement. I think the same political education could have happened with the intent of continuing the movement forward rather than being captured, I guess, going back to your comment, Yane, being captured and mystified by reactionary politics. Oh, go ahead, Yane.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, definitely, I think that, so one of the things that happened for me when Bernie conceded is I went with the Green Party and was tapped as a spokesperson for the Green Party's presidential ticket. And as a result, I got to like go to the convention and learn some things. And one of the things that I learned was that the Greens, and I'm sure many other people as well, always expected that that Bernie was going to concede and that he was being used as a sheepdog to take the disaffected members of the community, and instead of having them engage in true activist kind of activities, to actually just kind of recapture them into the Democratic Party. And so one of the things that I was frustrated with the Green Party was like, okay, so they were politically advanced as it relates to understanding how this was working, because everything that was in, like Bruce Dixon, you know, one of our newer ancestors who passed away, who wrote for Black Agenda Report, among other things, you know, had a piece that he wrote from the very beginning in 2015 about Bernie Sanders, and that and everything that he described is exactly how things went. So I was feeling like, if you all knew what was happening, why didn't you prepare for that moment and capture the masses? That's the thing that people keep forgetting. But also, I don't think that what Bernie was doing was at all revolutionary. I think that it was fully reform oriented. It was, what he was doing was he was suggesting that you could somehow have a transformed reality through the system, which is not possible. So that's automatically not revolution, that's reform. And so, so I would argue that he used revolutionary language. He tapped into the culture of revolution as part of his role of sheepdogging, you know, and taking people who maybe were actually ready for revolution and giving them a reform mandate and guiding them into a reform-based, mobilization, which again is a contrapositive mobilization using the language of George Jackson.
Right on, Yane. All right, Medusa, final thought?
Yeah, I just was hearing like the idea of class consciousness, and furthermore thinking about like how the labor unions were formed and how they actually organized on the ground. Working with Fight for 15, I got to see the way that SEIU actually organized, and that grassroots organizing that started with, what is it? Is it Harper's Rebellion? Is it Harper who starts this rebellion because he's a white man who wants to get his ideas across, and nobody's buying into it. And so he organizes the indentured servants from Africa and all over to, you know, take their labor back. And then in so doing, they end up going over to Africa, and instead of paying them a living wage, right? Instead of empowering them, they decide to buy the slaves. And so I think in terms of class consciousness in and of itself, throughout the diaspora, that these types of conversations around power and the power dynamic and the way that we wanted to show up is like our version of like a manifest destiny, if that makes any sense. Like, I think that we can, with this information that Comrade George has given us, really, he's laying like this really like dope perspective and blueprint on how to move forward, and like with confidence in a way, if any of that makes sense, y'all.
Oh, that makes plenty of sense, Medusa. And one thing I want to make sure is a point I was thinking about when I was reading. George helps us understand how much they study our resistance, freedom fighting formations, and continue to counter-react and plan against them. And I think what you're describing, Medusa, with this kind of blueprint that George has given us, we can also do the same. We can also study fascist formations over time to intentionally know, going back to something George reminded, exactly who is the enemy, what is that plan, and whether or not it's reactionary or it's a part of a class conscious struggle. Go ahead, Yane, final thoughts.
Oh, can I say?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, real quick before we finish, I just wanted to bring up this one point from back on like page 137, where you say the regime's interests are subject to those of the ruling class, and labor is a partner in this arrangement. At the head of any labor organization is the fascist state, and there's an elite which is tied to the interests of that regime and consequently also tied to the economic status quo. And this is the part I'm talking about, where you say, I just wanted to talk about the status quo, where he says, hold on, the trappings of this pseudo-mass society are empty, cheap, spectacular leisure sports, parades where strangers meet and shout down, often trampling each other to death on the way home, mass consumption of worthless super suds or aspirin, ritualistic ultranationalist events on days to glorify idiots who died at war. Basically, how they back up, they tie everybody in with like a national sense of pride with all this like sports and these parades and Independence Day and all of this to kind of, keep people like from thinking about how they being, to make you think you're a part of something as opposed to fighting the system, you know what I mean? Just try to tie you in with all this bullshit. I just wanted to highlight that point right there.
So on point, Al. So on point. Go ahead, Yana. You want to wrap us up?
Yeah. I that was one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on, was the way that he talked about the ways that the different communities, the different class-based or class relationship-based communities are manipulated through the system. Just that conversation that Al brought up, but also what Medusa brought up as it relates to the conversation about the unions. The other thing that made me think about, particularly, and though I know this is not the only example, but I think it's an extreme example, is the FOP and how they unionize. They use this idea of the union as a place that protects worker and protects labor in order to actually protect the elite, those who are not elite, they're not elite, but those who are in the ruling class. And I also was just thinking about, like, one of the things that people talk about is how the different, like, there's a idea, like this Illuminati idea, that there's this class of people that are at the top running the world in this very coordinated and highly intelligent and well-planned way. And while that idea is false and that we're giving too much credit, and while I do think that that's true, I definitely think that we should have to understand that there is a lot of like all of the work that we think we're doing at this level with, battling against people with different ideas and shifting and trying to win different battles. They are doing that at that level. And that's the only that's the level that we experience, whatever it is that we experience. So they are working to manipulate the working classes to their interests and to their varied interests, and to work and to manipulate and secure and extract the resources to their different interests. And they are playing their different games and their politics outside of what we're doing. And that is what we end up living with. That's the reality that we end up living under. And the last thing that I just wanted to point out is the statement that he made, capitalist political regimes cannot exist of their own. Without the support of government, capitalism simply could not prevail. And I thought that was just really also an important point, that capitalism is sustained by the government, and that the government is a tool of the capitalist system and those who most benefit from it and run the capitalist system. And that's what we have to remember when we're thinking of our targets, because we target these elected officials quite often when they are really also just a tool, and that this system is beyond capitalism and beyond this, beyond these elected officials are really what we have to get a better understanding of. So those are my final thoughts.
Makes sense.
Again, folks, another day of power, Black August. Every day we're blown away here. So I'm hoping everybody is continuing to learn and understand exactly what the work is. One thing you made me just think about in wrapping us up, Yane, is the purpose of the Vanguard. We have to accept that responsibility of beginning to politically educate people about this. Because in actuality, I'm beginning to better make sense of it. If we're not doing that, and we have the books, we have the plays that they're going to keep using to manipulate, capture the worker, then who's going to do it? Right. And that makes it even more relevant and more of immediacy of the Vanguard to continue this work. All right, everybody. Thank you guys. See you guys tomorrow, day 16, Black Power, Black August Power Hour. Any final thoughts, Yane?
No, just really appreciate this again, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
All right, y'all. What's the call?
Free 'em all.
Free 'em all. That's right. On the move.
Free Maroon.
That's right. Free Maroon. Free Mumia. That's right.